reminds me of one thing I need to do just really quick, and then we'll get started. And I come online and everybody was talking, and 5 seconds later, everybody's silent.
I know, it got really quiet.
I apologize for the dampening of conversation.
Hey, Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Are you gonna do, so the student list on my Moodle, I'm not included in it. There's only 18 students in this one.
Yep, I keep forgetting that I add you on a regular basis, but I keep forgetting to get the other ones updated down the road, so.
Okay.
I'll get you there. All right, I think, let's see. All right. Okay, so we are on chapter 5, and we are finishing up chapter 5. So let's see, our list for today is going to start with Porter.
Okay, so I chose number 22. Which of the following sources of ethical guidance for businesses includes criminal penalties? And that would be federal law.
Okay. Okay, so how can ethical guidance have criminal penalties? Criminal penalties tend to refer to what kind of standard?
Like our laws?
Our laws, which is our legal standard, right? And we've argued already in this class that is legal standard equivalent to ethical standard?
No.
No. Which one tends to have a higher level of expectation?
Ethical.
Ethical standards, right? So if we think about it, legal standards tend to focus on the what? What do they try to establish?
Yes, sorry. Like
The legal standard tries to, yeah, go. Sorry.
The legality of it, like.
Okay. It establishes the legality of it by telling us what we can and
cannot do.
Okay? Ethics don't tell us what we can and can't do. What do ethics try to tell us? What
you should do.
Should do, or what we ought to do. Okay, so one of the things that came up in our reading for today was this idea that something can be legal, but not ethical. Can you give me an example of something that is legal, but not ethical? Okay, Josh.
I referenced it in the reading, but the Papa John CEO, he used a certain language. It's legal for him to use that language, but it was unethical.
Okay, exactly. So, for example, foul language or racist language is protected by the First Amendment. Okay, all right? If I own a house that I am renting to somebody and they are behind on their mortgage or behind on their rent, even though it's winter, even though it's 30 degrees below zero outside, because I am the owner of the property, what can I do? I can kick them out. It's not necessarily ethical, but it is legal. Okay, so let's flip the script. Can you give me an example of something that is ethical, but that is not legal?
Like trespassing could be ethical but not legal.
Okay, trespassing. Now, normally trespassing for its own sake would not be ethical. But for example, if I was to come upon a house that was on fire and I heard a child crying in the upstairs bedroom, would it be ethical for me to trespass onto that property? Would it be ethical for me to kick in the door to get upstairs to try to save that child? Yes. Legally, it's not legal.
Are there certain laws though that in times of hazard or crisis or something that it
Okay, it doesn't change the legality of what I did, but what it does is it changes the consequence for what I do. It
kind of
will.
reminds me
Yes.
of in the very beginning of the Incredibles movie, where Mr. Incredible runs along the train track, jumps and saves the guy that jumps off the building, and
Yep.
that was ethical, but the public was like, that was against the law.
Well, the guy in that case was injured, right? Because he and it says he didn't ask to be saved. And Mr. Incredible, sorry, my voice acting sucks, so I'm going to stop right there. But yeah, this idea that I can save somebody, but in the course of it, I can injure them. That's not legal. But we have something, for example, called Good Samaritan laws. That if I hurt somebody in the course of trying to save them, I can be spared the legal consequence of my action. I have still broken the law, but I can be forgiven of the penalty for that because of these circumstances. Excellent. All right. We're off to a good start. Okay, Sam, you're up next.
Sir, so I decided to pick number 36. I had
Number
an
30.
example of a capitalist who's still, that word, has been guided by their religious beliefs. So,
Philanthropy.
I decided that I was going to go with Dolly Parton. Yeah.
Excellent.
This one's kind of a weird one because I know she's a singer, so on and so forth, but she has what's called Dollywood Foundation. And it gives kids books from birth to kindergarten.
Okay, half of the COVID, COVID doses in Nashville and in Tennessee were provided because she donated money to foundations that helped create the vaccine. Dolly Parton's a fantastic example of somebody whose wealth is now being used to a great degree because of her religious perspective and religious background. She's engaged in philanthropic, philanthropy meaning a love of humanity, right? So it's actions that we take based on, not because we expect it back, but because of a love of humanity. Dolly Parton's a fantastic example. Okay, perfect. So let me ask you this question, because the book kind of really gets into this for the first time, this kind of weird relationship, not so much weird, but unusual, the intersection of religion and ethics, specifically in business settings. Is it contradictory to consider religion and ethics when we're talking about business, which tends to be a very secular, meaning non-religious activity?
Yeah, I feel like this is actually a pretty hard topic because I am religious. And so when the book was kind of talking about ethics and religion being separate, religiously, like you have that set of ethics in your religion that is not separate from your religion. But then you have your outside ethics, which is how you have to relate to everybody around you, because you have to understand not everybody is religious. And so there's this balance you have to do in life where you're told to do good to the people around you. And so you kind of have this confliction of, do I act the way that I believe I should? Of course. But do I make or force people to act the way I think they should? No.
That's one of the great points that I think this chapter brings out. Do we have to separate religious belief as it influences our ethics in our personal life? No, right? We can hold ourselves to an ethical standard that is dictated by religion and be completely and totally ethically sound, right? I'm being consistent with my moral standards because my moral standards are derived from religious belief. And so as long as I act in accordance with those moral standards, and I'm trying to make the best decision in line with that, I am being 100% consistent with my ethics. Does that mean that because business is normally seen as secular or non-religious, does that mean that I cannot bring my religious morals into the business setting? No, because remember one of the things that Aristotle talked about, and a lot of them talked about, you cannot act one way in business and act a different way at home and try to be, you have to be consistent. But Sam brought up an absolutely fantastic point. I have to be internally consistent to my standards, however they are developed and whatever they are based on. The challenge comes if I try to impose or assert that the standards that I live by and the mechanisms by which I arrived at them have to be adhered to by others. That's where the challenge comes. And that's where this entire conversation about culture comes from, right? That's what it's really all about. I believe this way, and I try to act this way. I want to encourage ethical behavior from other people, but I have to recognize and respect how they develop their moral code and how they implement it. And I also have to be willing to recognize that nobody is 100% consistent with their ethical standard. We strive for it, but just because we strive for it doesn't mean we always live up to it, right? We have our values, but that doesn't necessarily mean all of our actions are in compliance with those values. And it's very difficult if we have specific standards or expectations that we then transfer or expect others to adhere to in exactly the same way as we do. And that's where, because it's, and does that mean that business has to be completely secular? Does it have to be completely non-religious? No, but I have to recognize differences of opinion, the absence of that, and the differences in culture. And I have to be able to infuse flexibility or relativity to make sure things work for it. Okay?
Hey,
So excellent point. Yes, please.
I have an ethics question. So earlier this week, I had something going on. I had to stay at home. Couldn't come back to Pocatello to take the COVID test. Got an email,
Okay.
and so on and so forth. And it said, your participation will help keep the Bengal community safe this spring. Well, I was not able to do that in that time frame because I'm still out in Letha. So does that mean is it ethical for them to send me this, the altruism or whatever, the better for all people? Or is it kind of wrong, even without them knowing the situation, to send me an email that I would say kind of guilt trips me for not, it puts that assumption that I don't feel like I need to participate in this, or I don't feel like I need to protect the community against.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at what ethics are all about. If we go all the way back to Aristotle, the entire purpose of ethics was to foster and support the economy. Now remember, economy was not just about business and money. It was about the well-being of the society, right? And so the entire idea of ethics and virtue are those behaviors most likely to promote the well-being of the society so that it continues onward. So, that being the case, if I'm sending out a letter intended to encourage people to engage in practices most likely to protect the well-being of the society or community, in this case, the Bengal community, one would argue that it is ethical. Now, you bring up a great question. To what degree or what means can we use to bring about the good of society? And this is where you bring in the question. If you don't get your vaccination, know that you have single-handedly destroyed the educational experience of thousands of other people. If that was the message of this letter, then we will hold you personally responsible for us not being able to return to a class without masks in the fall. Is that ethically acceptable? Why not? It protects society.
What if you can't get the vaccination? What if you're allergic to certain components in that vaccination?
Okay, that's an excellent point. If we were to look at Kant and his categorical imperative, the rule is do unto others essentially as you would have them do unto you. Kant's categorical imperative says we should not take any action or make any law that we would not want to have made as a universal law for everyone. Any action that we take should be something that we would want everybody else to do the exact same thing. Okay? If that's the case, if we're looking at ISU and they're sending out a guilt email intended to emotionally harass you because you did not take the vaccine, is it appropriate for anybody and everybody to emotionally harass other people to get them to do what they want? We would consider that emotionally manipulative, wouldn't we? Okay, so sending out a letter encouraging you to protect the society, is that ethical? Yes. Is using emotional manipulation to do that ethical? Probably argue that the answer is no. That the means are just as important as the end. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I think we're at Zach.
Yeah, is number 30 still open?
Number 30. That's a great question. If I had my glasses on, I'd be able to tell you, yes, it is. Hey.
Yeah, it looks like it. All right, so it says, true or false, culture and ethics cannot be separated because the ethical norms have been established over time by and make sense to people who share the same background, language, and customs. I think, even based off of how this is worded, that would be true, that you really can't separate culture and ethics.
Okay, because most of the time, the ethics that we arrive at, our expectations, our moral standards, are a reflection of the culture in which we are raised, right? Those ethical norms, what we consider to be appropriate, have been established over time and make sense to the people that have belonged to the same background. Okay, excellent. Okay, Billy, you're up. Billy going once. Billy going twice. All right. Haley, I think you're up now.
Can I do 16?
That's a great question. Let's see. Unfortunately, no, you can't. We've already done that one.
Can I do 37?
37. Yes, you can.
So one example of ethical failures related to consumers' private data was a couple of years ago when Facebook was under investigation and they were charged with violating customers' privacy and deceiving users about their ability to control their privacy.
Okay? Why would that be an ethical failure?
Because so many people are on Facebook and they were it was related to data privacy and security.
Okay? So the idea was that we will share information with you under the assumption that you will protect it, and that they did not. In fact, they used it for commercial purposes. Excellent. Okay? What's another one? Anybody have an idea they can help her?
I do. So
Okay, what do you got?
I can't remember how long ago this was, and I remember reading it recently that something about, I think it was this past year in the summertime, Twitter was hacked by a few teenagers, and under different like celebrities' names, there was like false Bitcoin advertisements and stuff like that that were almost like traps, but they were kind of also, it had something to do with the user's information as well. And I can't remember every single detail, but I feel like that falls under the same category.
Okay. All right. So why would this be such a big deal? Why would number 37 be such a big deal?
This kind of goes back to that ethical dilemma we had a little while back.
Last week.
Yeah, when why people were giving away your information, selling your information without knowing it, and they were saying that it's ethical because you don't know about it. And then the opposing viewpoint said just because a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, that doesn't mean that there's no sound being made. So therefore, it is not ethical. And so that's why this is a big problem here.
Okay, so let's look at another example that they've mentioned in the book, and that's Equifax. Anybody know what Equifax is?
You keep track of your credit.
It's a credit bureau, right? These are folks that create a portfolio based on your financial activity. Whether or not when you take out debt, do you pay it back? Do you pay it back on time? How responsible are you? How much debt do you carry? Why is that a big deal?
It kind of shows how you are as far as like your responsibility with your finances.
Okay, because it tracks this information, other companies that offer credit, like credit card companies, mortgage companies, their decisions about how to interact with you and the cost of interacting with you is based primarily on your credit score, which is a reflection of your overall responsibility. Okay, Equifax got hacked and lost access, and they gave up access to millions of people's credit accounts. Okay? All that information was now publicly available. Well, here's the thing. First of all, there's the question of how did it happen? Okay, that I can understand. I mean, hackers and IT security are a constantly challenging field. What the issue with Equifax was when it happened, they didn't say anything. And they weren't going to say anything until somebody exposed that they had been hacked. They were just going to pretend like it never happened, and they were going to keep it quiet. How is that an ethical failure?
Because you're not telling the people who like have put their trust in you, like you're not telling them what's going on, so then they like lose their trust for your ability to like do what they're supposed to do.
Okay, if I gain access to somebody's credit information, I can do all kinds of things. I can take out debt and loans and all kinds of things in somebody's name, and it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to prove identity theft, right, which is a growing problem and can have huge impact on your future if I'm not aware that it's happening.
Super easy for that to happen, but it's super hard to get any of that stuff figured out.
Exactly.
We tried for years, and it's still never off.
I was just gonna say that not only is Equifax being dishonest, but they're not even taking the steps to commit the ethical minimum.
Thank you. There's that concept of ethical minimums, right? The least they could do is inform people that it happened. Once it came out that Equifax had done this and had tried to cover it up, Equifax went and said, we will provide credit monitoring for a year. And everybody's going, that's the best you got? That's the best ethical minimum you can come up with? The only reason you came up with that was because you got caught. You weren't even going to give us that. That's where the ethical failure comes in. And what made it interesting is Equifax was then called to testify in front of Congress because there were questions about whether they had met the legal minimum for what had happened. This was beyond just an ethical failure. It was a question of whether it was a legal failure. Okay. This is big deal stuff. I mean,
Do you know if they ended up getting persecuted at all for breaking the law? It seems like I remember they got out of it.
I think they got out of it. They probably did. If you think about it, they're a large enough company and they run a critical aspect of that business that they probably avoided what we would normally think of as what is fair. Another classic example is Wells Fargo. Okay, does anybody know the story about Wells Fargo? Okay. Ouch.
Sorry.
Okay, the one that I can remember most recently was the company, and especially the CEO, had a huge amount of pressure, especially on entry-level loan officers and other officers, to create or to encourage people to engage in multiple accounts with the company. Not only do you have your bank account here, but we're gonna have you keep your 401k here. We're gonna encourage you to have a mutual fund. We're gonna encourage you to have a savings account. We're gonna encourage, because they knew that the more accounts you had with Wells Fargo, the more likely they were to do what? Collect fees for various things, right? So some of these individuals, in a desire to be in line with what the CEO was asking, and because they would receive benefits and rewards for doing this, for increasing account numbers, just started going to people's accounts and creating on their behalf, well, we're going to create a credit card for you. You don't have to use it, but we're going to create it. And we're going to create, and people were finding out that Wells Fargo employees had created dozens of accounts for individual account holders. Without their knowledge, without their permission, why would that be a problem? Hey, I'm providing you with services. You don't even have to pay for it. It all shows up on my credit report. All of a sudden, I'm seeing credit cards that were opened in my name that I never authorized. Right? Which can affect my available credit because I have multiple open accounts.
You would have to 4 or 5 different times go part of our account was hacked.
Okay? Yeah. And so Wells Fargo was called again to Congress, and they were just saying, well, we're just trying to proactively act in our client's interest. You don't realize the benefit of having a health savings account. We'll create one for you, whether you even know you have it or not. And they're going, that's not how this works. Okay. Megan, I think you're up.
Can I do number 8?
That's a great question. Let's see. Number 8 is available. What do you got?
Which of the following major historical periods did not shape business ethics? And I said A, the Middle Ages.
Okay. Why is that?
Because the Middle Ages were more like a beginning period in all this. Like the information age was when like technology was coming out, and economic globalization was when like businesses were moving all over the world. And I just think the Middle Ages was the least one that didn't shape the business ethics. It did the least help with that.
Okay, yeah, we don't connect the Middle Ages to a lot of business practices and business ethics. Why not?
Wasn't it more about what the kings and queens allocated to people?
Okay, for one reason, there wasn't a lot of private property ownership. People did not own things. The majority of property was owned by noble people. Okay, so business tended to be very limited in scope, right? We didn't have people selling in multiple locations. You normally would have everything, the means of production would be owned by a very few people. Also, transportation was very limited. You did not have people traveling quite often to other places to sell goods. Goods tended to remain in the locality in which they were created. Okay, so we didn't have a lot of business in its kind of modern sense taking place. Okay, excellent. All right, Cattell, you're up.
Okay, I'm gonna pick 17.
Number 17. Okay.
And it's federal sentencing guidelines. And there's 7 of them. They create code of ethics, introduce high levels of oversight, place ethical people in positions of authority, communicate ethics standards, facilitate employee reporting of misconduct, react and respond to instances of misconduct, and take preventative steps.
Okay. So why is this included in our discussion today? Well, first of all, because it's federal guidelines.
Is it kind of like a way for businesses to make sure that they stay like as ethical as they can, like, I don't know, like consistently?
Okay. Now remember, and this is exactly it, because this introduces not federal legal guidelines, but federal ethical guidelines, which suggests it is a higher standard. If I comply with federal sentencing guidelines, do I need to worry about whether or not I'm going to violate the law? No, because I've already created that cushion. There is a margin between ethical behavior and legal behavior most of the time, right? We talked about that there's possibilities for us to do things that are ethical, not legal, and such like. But the idea of these ethical standards gives us a greater margin to make sure that we are in compliance. Yes?
Is it also kind of like a barrier for the business? So like if one of their employees did do something illegal, they couldn't just pin it on the business? Like if the business is following the ethical guidelines from the government, like then they're not liable for the actions of the employee.
Not only that, but it also creates a greater likelihood that other people will not be implicated along with that individual. It minimizes the ability for corruption to expand inside the business, right? If I'm adhering to an ethical standard, that's one of the margins it protects me from, which is corruption. Okay. Tanner. Not sure if Tanner's here today because I think.
Nope, I'm here.
Are we good? Are we good to go?
We'll try, man. I'm a little doped up on painkillers, but we'll give it a shot.
All right.
All right. Has number 21 been done?
21 has not been.
Okay, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that they comply with local, state, national, and international laws and regulations.
Okay. What's the difference between, you are correct. What's the difference between B and A?
I think I think it's how they're regulated. I mean, individual and organizational and societal regulations don't dictate how everything is run. But if it's gonna be a systematic thing, it has to be kind of I'd say like a largely regulated thing. I can be. Sorry, I'm not making any sense.
Right. Okay, if we think about, I mean, now we have talked about the idea of individual, organizational, and societal, right? Can we create individual law? No.
No.
Can we create organizational law?
No.
Okay, so that's why it cannot be A, because there is no such thing as individual law. There is no such thing as the law of Winco, right? So when you walk into Winco, you're subject to these laws. Or when you walk into Fred Meyer, sorry, you just violated this by going the wrong way with those arrows that indicate the correct direction when they first put those out. Now you have to understand, my wife is blind, okay? So she goes around with a cane and she's in Walmart. And now she has she has about 5 degrees of vision. A normal person has 220. So she has basically got tunnel vision. She can literally see what is in the frame of her glasses, and that's it. Okay, so she can see a little bit. She goes to Walmart and they have all those arrows, please stay on the right-hand side of the lane, and she just goes straight into the left lane and she's just going along, and my daughter is freaking out. Mom, you're on the wrong side of the aisle. And my wife turns around and looks at her and says, oh, honey. My daughter, when she got her permit, refused to drive 3 blocks to our local little mini store to grab some milk for my wife. When my wife asked her, why won't you go? Mom, I will not break the law, even for my mom. So, okay, I get this fixed. Sorry, I had that turned off. It's one of those classic, my wife yells at me when I turn off my ringer, because then I don't hear her calls, but then my phone always goes off and doesn't reply. So anyway, but the point is, we do not have organizational law. We do not have, I mean, we can have policies, we can have procedures, but we do not have this ability to create organizational responsibility assignments, because it has to relate to legal statutes, which can be established at the local, state, national, and international level. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Tanner.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, Jackson, are you with us? Jackson going once. Jackson going twice. All right, Caden, you're up.
All right. I'm gonna do number 19.
Okay.
It's available. Let me check. Let me double check. Hold on.
It's in the business's best interest to promote human flourishing within the organization by providing what?
I said comprehensive training. That one.
Okay. How so? How does that?
I think that having training just will make the individual more efficient, and it would also make the employee happy if they're comfortable with doing their job correctly.
Okay, so the idea of comprehensive training is not just Here's what you have to do to be able to do your own job. Comprehensive training is also, here's how other organizations or other parts of the business work. How would that make an individual employee more effective?
I think that if they know that other companies are doing it and they're doing it right, and if they do the same thing, I think that they can, I don't know, maybe they'll feel more comfortable.
Okay, that's one excellent answer. Any other ideas? Okay, when we talk about the idea of human flourishing, what does that phrase mean?
That's like doing really well in your work.
Okay, it's this person is living up to their maximum potential.
Is it basically better than average or better than normal?
Yeah, they're doing better than they would normally do. One of the reasons that comprehensive training can lead us to that is you might have been hired to do job X. But what happens if you were to be able to find out, well, our company also does Y, and man, I'd love to do that. If I had access to be able to, I might have been hired to do X, but if I found out that I could do Y and I went to do that, does that increase my potential? How so?
Is it something that you enjoy more or want to do more, so then you'll put more effort into it?
Yes. If I can find the best place for me to contribute to the company, what's likely to happen is I'm going to produce or contribute more, or I'm going to be more effective or more efficient by finding the best place for me. Okay? If we look back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where people started to be seen as work units rather than individuals, there was this kind of process of, you will be hired to complete this task. When you're hired to complete that task, guess what you do? That task and only that task. We are only going to train you on what you need to know to do the job you were hired for. Whether or not you were suited for it, whether or not it was of the most interest, or if that was where you had the most capacity or capability. You were only hired to do this, and therefore you will only do this. If we need to move you to a new job, we will then train you for the new job. Okay? But this concept of comprehensive training now allows me to explore different alternatives and different pathways inside the business, which benefits the business because how would this make the business work better? I mean, that sounds great for the worker, but how does that help the business? Think about your own experience. Caden, what do you think?
I don't know. I think if you're more suitable for a different position and you're more efficient in it, then they'd rather have you there than where you were previously.
Yep. That's the first part. If I find a job that I like, a job I feel good at, a job I feel comfortable with,
you're going to have a better opinion of the company.
And I'm going to be more productive, right? But the other thing is, if I find a job that really fits me, am I likely to go and find or leave and do a new job? No, so I'm going to probably stay there. So all of the work and effort the company put into training me, they're going to get a higher, they call it a return on investment, right? Because every time you get trained, is it cheap? No, the company has to put money into training you. So if I can keep somebody there, the more they generate increases my return on investment, the amount of money I generate because I trained you in doing this. So the longer you stay at a company, the more money they can generate because you're there, because you're more skilled. So for example, which I'm going to pick on you because you've mentioned this a couple of times, you are a huge Chick-fil-A fan.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned was if you work at Chick-fil-A and you're a student, for example, and you leave to go to school, they tell you immediately, if you come home during Christmas break or holiday break, we will guarantee that we'll hire you back as seasonal help. What benefit does that have? Why is that a benefit to Chick-fil-A?
Because they, like, I'm already trained so that I can come back and like help with teaching new people or with
Just working the line.
in general.
Yeah, so by giving you a promise that you automatically have employment if you come back, it decreases their training costs. So it's that idea of human flourishing. Go and get your education. That makes you a better worker. And if you come back to help us, it decreases our cost and increases our profitability. And by the way, it puts money in your pocket, which is going to make you more likely to come back again and again and again. See how this idea of the humanistic business model is not just a philanthropic business model. It's not just derived out of a desire to make humans better. It has that consequence, but Chick-fil-A's policy, while benefiting its employees, benefits its corporate business.
Would you say that whole situation would be a part of business continuity?
It is. It's increasing business continuity. That's exactly what it is. This is why, for example, businesses tend to have opportunities where they will pay for, if you work for us, we will provide tuition benefits. Now, doesn't that seem like they're trying to train you to leave to go someplace else?
Like I know, you get hired, but they're always encouraging education. And they don't want you to stay stagnant, they want you to.
And that's that idea of human flourishing. If you're growing and learning, that's going to change your attitude and behavior. It's also going to increase your sense of loyalty to the company because of the help that they gave you, which in turn results in higher productivity, higher efficiency, which helps the company. Okay, so this is why humanistic business models tend to be highly ethical, because they're constantly looking for how can we benefit the largest number of people. Okay. It also makes Chick-fil-A kind of unusual because it's fast food, which tends to have incredibly high turnover. Because it tends to be, and I've worked there, a miserable experience. I've done it several times. Okay? It can be a miserable experience. And they tend to be highly focused on productivity over human flourishing, right? The idea is, if you work here or you don't, doesn't matter to us, we'll always be able to find somebody else to replace you. Okay? Chick-fil-A sounds like it's a very different work environment. It has a very different attitude. Okay? Please don't construe that as a corporate sponsorship for that location. All right, Kyle, I think you're up.
Hi there, Mr. Lambert. Can I do number 18?
You can do number 18.
The question is, if normative business ethics is to recognize and ultimately be based on individual ethics rather than company ethical standards, it must address which other human trait, and I said C, bias.
Okay.
And I mean, the reading talks about it because, like, you know, bias is a part of every decision-making process that goes on. And by not, I guess not recognizing bias, it goes into that, you know, this self-awareness. And
okay. So when we talk about normative business ethics as opposed to company business ethics, what are we talking about here? If it says normative business ethics, oh, sorry. Sorry, I think I cut you off there, Kyle.
Oh no, will you repeat what you asked?
Yeah, what's the difference between normative business ethics and company business ethics?
maybe a you know, a company's a larger scale, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, well, let's think about what that word normative means.
I mean, normal ethics. So a standardized set of ethics.
Okay, and so we're saying that normative ethics or standardized ethics should be focused more on what? Individual standards rather than company standards. Why?
Because
This comes back to something I say pretty often.
well, I don't know.
Can a company have ethics?
Oh, yeah.
Can they?
Well,
Can a company have ethics?
the ethics of the people that work there.
Yes, the company does not have ethics. The company is made up of people who have ethics. That's what normative business ethics is talking about. It's making sure that the individuals that work at the company share common individual traits rather than saying the company as a whole is going to establish these rules, because the rules are not applied to the individual as a company. They're operated by individuals for individuals. The best way to have consistent ethics inside of an organization is to ensure that there's normative that everybody agrees with and lives up to, rather than just saying, well, as a company, we have this policy. It works best if the people naturally, inherently act that way, and that we find people who share those ethical standards and recognize and share bias, that they have consistent bias among them, that they all see things the same way. Okay, why is that difficult to achieve?
Well, I mean, I guess moral values amongst individuals change, which, I mean, as long as it's above the legal limit, maybe their possible ethical decisions might be slightly different.
Okay. Now remember, we talked in class on Tuesday about where most of our ethics come from. What? Starts with a C. Our culture, right? And that culture tends to reflect the society or group that we grew up in. And that would be great if our business was located in a place where everybody shared the exact same culture. But what do we discover more and more and more? What happens? Do cultures exist in a vacuum?
Becoming diverse, more and more diverse.
Right, we're becoming more and more diverse. Remember how we talked about if I have people from society A that all share the same values and people from society B that share values, as long as they're separate, that's fine. But when they come in contact with each other, what tends to happen? We'll have some people that stick with society A and its culture, some people that will stick with society B and its culture, and some people will what? They'll mix and they'll create a society C, right? And we have created transportation and communications technologies that we're not even talking about culture C, we're talking about culture C cubed, right? That's what this concept of globalization is. We're starting to see people whose culture is a mesh of multiple cultures that have all intersected. Okay, so it's very difficult for us to create a corporate culture because we don't have what we call a homogeneous where everybody's the same. We have very heterogeneous societies where there's multiple people that come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, and they mix on a consistent basis. Okay, excellent. All right, let's see, Scott. Scott going once. Scott going twice. All right, Logan. Logan going once. Logan going twice. Okay, Winter.
Okay. Let me see. I think I'm gonna do number 5.
Number 5.
Okay, so most business organizations hold 3 different kinds of beliefs about themselves. Which of the following is not a belief that business is hold? The belief that business is not culturally neutral.
Okay.
And I have a note on it. So, yeah, so businesses are often involved in like a ton of different cultures. So they kind of have to like cater toward them a little bit. Like they can't just be like, this is all we are, even because like the business wherever it was created is probably gonna be like somewhat related to the culture that is in that area. So if they're working with a different culture, they can't just be like, this is what it is and we don't listen to you. Like, I don't know, to actually work well in that other culture, they have to kind of cater toward it.
Right. I mean, think about it. How many times have you heard Citizens Community Bank? We're part of Southeastern Idaho. We know Southeast. We know who you are. We are part of your community. Right? We hold the same values that you do. We share the same beliefs. Therefore, you should bank with us because we know who you are and we know what you need. Okay, that's the exact opposite of being culturally neutral. Cultural neutrality says our business does not have anything to do with the local business that we're at. It's nearly impossible for a business to be culturally neutral because, I think this gets back to what Aristotle said, economy is all about society and the community. So for us to have negotiations and business relationships, it is inherently social. It's inherently cultural. So to say that we're culturally neutral is nearly impossible. Okay? Good. Anthony, you're up.
All right. Well, I also did number 5, but now I'm going to do number 6. I like
Oh,
number
you
6.
are being wild and crazy, man. All right, what do you got?
Which of the following definitions best describes
Consumerism?
Yes.
Okay.
And I chose A, the lifestyle characterized by the acquisition or that of goods and services. And the way that I was taught about it is that, so say that I go to some massage place and I buy this massage and it feels great because I'm feeling great. And I was sore the other day, but now I've got that massage and it feels great. But then I go back an hour later and I do the same thing. That second one has less value to me because I was just there and I just bought that product or that service.
Okay. I would agree. I think that example might not clarify it as well, but it's this idea that my identity or function is simply as a person who consumes or acquires goods. So for example, classic example, Christmas commercials, and specifically Christmas car commercials. If I see another commercial where somebody has put a bow on top of a car, right? My personal favorite was, I'm trying to think of who it was for. I think it was Toyota. And the husband and wife are standing in the kitchen and he opens a box and she has given him matching red and black fitness activity armbands, a Fitbit, right? And she goes, I got one for you and me. And he goes, huh, that's funny, so did I. And they go outside and there are 2 cars sitting out in the parking lot. One's a huge $70,000 truck and some other type of SUV, right? And she goes, I love it. And she grabs the keys for the black truck and he goes, no, 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 that's mine. She goes, no, it's mine. I love it. And I remember the first time I see this commercial and I look at my wife and I say, if I ever buy $140,000 worth of automobiles without telling you as a surprise, you have my permission to shoot me. But it was this act of purchasing a $70,000 car as a Christmas gift it's this funny joke. That would be an example of consumerism, that your identity is only as a person who has to buy the newest, the most expensive, and that you constantly have to buy new things because that's what everybody wants you to do. Or that your purpose is simply to buy things because that's what the newest thing is. Yes.
It could also be like signing up for like Apple's phone plan. So where like when the next iPhone 13 comes out, you go out and buy it.
Not because your phone is broken, not because your phone has lost any functionality, but simply because this is the new phone that you are expected to purchase because it's the new one.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah, it's like the Samsung Galaxy 3026, right? Because we're going to get to that number eventually. Because there's a new Samsung phone about every 6 months. And therefore, and it's not even because it offers new features that are specifically necessary or useful, but just because it's the new iPhone or it's the new whatever. Okay. So why does the book bring up consumerism? How does that have anything to do with ethics?
To go buy every new thing that like just is made.
Okay, but from a business ethics, business is supposed to sell. So wouldn't they want people to feel like they need to continually buy new things? Because that's how you keep customers. Okay, so there's this question of the environment as a stakeholder is negatively impacted by consumerism. Because every time you buy something new, you have to do something with the old one. Good. How else might consumerism fit into business ethics?
I would say business strategy of each business, like with the example of Apple that you brought up earlier in the year about their batteries, how they specifically designed their batteries to fail after a certain amount of time. So therefore people had to buy more of their product, whether they wanted to or not.
This guy, it's the term, I believe it's intentional obsolescence. It's designed to wear out, right? The idea used to be that you bought a car, you could maintain it yourself and it could last for a very, very long time. Cars aren't designed that way anymore. Or TVs, or a number of products. But here's the bigger concept or ethical challenge of consumerism. Am I selling this because the audience or my client really needs it? Or am I selling it because I need them to buy it? What's the difference between the two? Am I selling it because they need it, or am I selling it because I need them to buy it? What's the difference? If I'm selling it because they need it, what is the relationship between me as the business and my client?
That you're trying to. No,
yes. No, she already went. But what were you going to say?
That instead of doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the customer to be satisfied or have a need done. So like if a company was selling snow shovels because yesterday it just snowed a foot.
Yep. That's an example where I'm treating the customer as the end. I'm meeting their need, and they're the reason why I'm selling the product. But if I'm creating an environment where they buy the product because I need them to, what's now happened? Am I treating them as the end purpose of my business? No, they are a means to me keeping my business going. And that violates Kant's imperative. We're supposed to treat people as the end, not the mean. And consumerism no longer considers the consumer's needs, but the company's needs. And those are placed before the client. That violates the ethical standard. Okay? All right. Andrew.
I'll do number 12.
Number 12. Okay, go for it.
For its part, the business operates within at least how many cultures, and I chose B2.
Okay.
Organizational culture and wider culture on which it was founded. And the section I found this answer and also said that a third comes into play when a business tries to establish itself in a new environment with things like overseas supply, manufacturing, distribution chains, transportation, and just overall their markets.
Okay, so yeah, so you've got internal culture, the way things work inside the business, the laws, rules, and procedures of how we do things, right? The Ford way, right? This is how we do things here. Then you have where that company is located. That's the second culture, because that's where their customers are coming from. That's where their employees are coming from. So that's the second one. The third, like Andrew said, is as it gets bigger, it tends to have to get resources outside of its local location. So then it has to interact with all the people that are either I'm selling my goods outside of my culture or I'm bringing goods into it, or I'm expanding into another one, and then those new cultures. Excellent.
I think that can honestly be summed up with one word. Wouldn't it be just outsourcing? If they outsource their distribution or their manufacturing, like, I guess what
Close. Because it's outsourcing is saying I'm transferring responsibility to that location, and that's not necessary, because if I'm selling goods in a new place, I'm not outsourcing in that case. I'm not giving the responsibility over, but I am selling in that new place, and I have to realize how to sell. So it's close, but I think the terminology there's a little tricky. Okay, Kaysen.
Yes.
All right.
Can I do 41?
Number 41. All right, go for it.
Okay, and if you don't mind, I would like to use an example, a personal example of yours that you've shared before in class.
Oh no, this scares me.
I
Okay.
wouldn't. Sorry, could you say that again? It cut out.
What do you got?
Okay. So the example I was thinking of is what you brought up when you said you were the head of this department of ethics or what have you. And if I recall correctly, you said your wife also works at the university underneath you, and at some point you had to get someone who's kind of third party to help manage her to make sure you weren't either showing favoritism or showing, any sort of personal bias against her. Right? And so one way you can overcome it is also with your example of having someone with a third party that is not biased in the same way that you are biased, at least, to kind of mediate between your responsibilities and your personal beliefs, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of hard to be able to supervise somebody that you live with, right? And be able to say that I'm going to treat them the same way I treat everybody else. So initially the plan was that she would work for somebody else who would be her direct supervisor. Problem was, I was that person's supervisor. So can I honestly say that the person who was supervising my wife was going to be able to say that they could act without having to think about how is Clayton going to react if I have to call this person on the carpet? Right? It was a very tricky situation. It eventually got resolved because COVID basically eliminated the need for my wife's position. So I was off the hook from an ethical standard because I got to be honest, having that third person in between us really didn't seem to feel like it was providing a sufficient barrier ethically. And it was going to be ugly, and I didn't know how we were going to solve it because I could tell it was going to be a problem. But then with COVID, they didn't need her to be here anymore. And so it was kind of, as sad as she was to leave the job, it kind of it lessened the stress because of, like you said, that individual bias. We were all supposed to be able to trust and feel like everybody is going to be treated fairly inside this department. But when somebody is working in that department who has a very intense, intimate, personal relationship with the boss, that automatically violates or increases bias in that environment. Perfect. Thank you, Kason. You scared me there for a minute.
Sorry.
All right. Oh, you're totally good. Josh, you're up.
Number 28, true or false? The Enlightenment was a period during which religion and ethics were separated successfully. That's false. Religion gives people a base morality.
Yeah.
They can't really separate from them.
That's true.
Bring anything into, well, people typically will bring their religion into everything business-wise.
Okay.
Chick-fil-A is an example of this.
Okay.
They show their Christianity, and they'll let you know their Christianity beliefs, even though they don't sort of push that off onto their customers. But they still bring it into them, and they treat the customers based on those beliefs.
Okay. Yeah, there's not a lot of Christianity in the way you make a chicken sandwich. But there is you can say there are Christian values in the way I treat my employees, the way I treat my customers, the way I acquire resources and distribute those resources. But I am going to disagree with you that the Enlightenment didn't. Okay, the idea of the Enlightenment was this increase in secular science and secular philosophy. Because one of the things that was happening during the Enlightenment is up to that point, church and state were one and the same, right? That the church was part of the legitimization of kings did not rule because they were kings. They were kings because they ruled by divine right, that they believed that God had called them to be kings. And the church supported that argument and therefore was intrinsically involved in governance. During the Enlightenment, we started to say, are there other ways of operating? And this is where science and philosophy started to say, we still have place for religion, but it doesn't have to be the only way that things can be known. It doesn't have to be the only way that things can operate. And that part of the Enlightenment was also the breaking down to a degree of the absolute rule of the church, right? We see the rise of, for example, Protestantism, right, as a way of saying the individual has a role. It is not solely the role of the church to designate what is right and wrong, but the individual can find knowledge for themselves and can rule themselves, and that rationality is as much a function of things as a religious organization. And so I think that the Enlightenment is this first time where, I mean, a lot of what we see in democratic rule in the United States is a direct influence or is a direct result of the Enlightenment that says individuals can rule themselves. They do not have to be ruled, which was the fundamental belief of the period prior to that. And so for them to break that off, suddenly if individuals can rule themselves, they have to know how to, and that's where the ethics started to develop, not just based on religion, but from other things, that people can learn these things. rather than just simply you are inherently good or inherently bad and nothing you can do can change that. You can rationally develop this. Okay, let's see. All right, Jack, you're up. You with us today? Okay, I don't think Jack's with us. So, all right, let's see. And since we didn't have any scores today, these will actually matter. All right, so we have number 6, number 1, and number 9. I was telling myself I need to get another generator because these things, they come up with the same numbers every time. All right, so number 1, number 6, and number 9. So Porter, Megan, Jackson wasn't here, so let's get one more for that. And we'll be done for the day. I apologize that we did not get to the video. And I will have one posted for that for you to submit as soon as I can. So we needed another. Number 11. I think that's, is that Caden? Let's see.
Kyle.
Kyle, okay. All right, so let me just make sure. Okay, so I do have the thing for fakeresume.com. Make sure you don't forget that. And other than that, I think we're good to go for the weekend. There should be some decent snow, so if you need to get out and get some snowboarding or skiing in, please go with my blessing. Just please be safe. Please be safe. Please drive safely. I mean, I saw a girl this morning get out of her car and man, she just biffed it on the ice. It was bad. She's at the hospital now. It was that bad. It was a pretty bad fall. So folks, it's slippery. It sounds like there's going to be a storm for the next couple of days. So if you're traveling, please be safe, please be careful, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.